My name is Bird Whistle Nashville. I am 76 years old and I have lived in my own house on Maple Street in Sioux City for over 40 years. I inherited the house from my father, a two-story red brick cottage with a small garden and old oak trees in the yard. It had once been a happy family, me, my late wife Margaret, and little Cordelia. Now my daughter and son-in-law sit at my dining room table once a week for a family dinner, and the atmosphere in the house is not what it was when Margaret was alive. Tonight's Sunday dinner began, as usual, with Cordelia complaining about work. "That damn new manager's gone crazy," she said, waving her fork vigorously over her plate of meatballs. "He wants us to process 20% more requests per shift. 20%. It's like the drivers are driving themselves on the routes and the loads are teleporting from A to B." My daughter Cordelia, in her 52 years, works as a senior dispatcher for a local transportation company called Rapid Delivery. The job is nerve-wracking, requiring constant supervision of dozens of drivers and hundreds of trucking jobs. After my mother died 10 years ago, she made it a habit to come to my house for dinner every Sunday, ostensibly to check on my old father. In fact, these visits are more like a chore that she does without much enthusiasm, more out of habit than out of genuine concern. "I understand your indignation, dear," her husband Danby said, carefully cutting the meat into equal pieces. "It's the same story at American Sure Insurance. New requirements every week and they're downsizing." Danby Clutterbuck, 55, works as a senior insurance inspector for one of the state's largest insurance companies. Average height, neatly trimmed beard, attentive gray eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. He and Cordelia were married 5 years ago. She a widow, he a divorcee. They live in the new Greenwood Hills neighborhood on the outskirts of town, in one of those two-bedroom, two-bathroom houses with a garage that are being built for the growing middle class. Danby treats me politely but somewhat aloofly, more like an obligatory relative with whom he has to keep in touch for his wife's sake. He never objects to Sunday dinners and participates in the conversations, but I sense that for him, these visits are also more of an obligation than a pleasure. "What exactly did you have to do at work today?" Cordelia asked her husband, pouring more tea from the teapot. "Dealing with a suspicious fire on 4th Street. Danby put down his fork and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "The owner of a Techno-World electronics store is trying to get insurance for merchandise that supposedly burned in a fire 3 weeks ago." "So, what, fraud?" "Absolutely. The paperwork's so crudely forged, even an intern would have noticed the inconsistencies. The invoices were printed on an ordinary home printer, the stamps are fake. Even the paper isn't the same quality as the big electronic suppliers." Danby sounded professional, but I noticed he was a bit distracted today. Several times my son-in-law looked away from the conversation and glanced toward my desk, which stood in the corner of the living room between the bookcase and the large window. The solid oak desk with 3 drawers had been inherited from my father and had been in service for more than half a century. The tabletop was scuffed from time, but the wood was sturdy, reliable. There I read the morning papers, did crossword puzzles, and occasionally wrote letters to the few remaining old acquaintances. "How much money?" Cordelia inquired. "Almost $150,000, Danby replied. "But I have calculated the real value of the goods at market prices, at most $30,000, not more. On top of that, the inventory includes items that this store doesn't sell." "Like what?" "Professional video cameras, studio equipment, medical equipment, and the store specializes in consumer electronics for the home, refrigerators, washing machines, TVs." "What's going to happen to the owner now?" Cordelia continued to ask. "A criminal case is guaranteed." Danby shrugged indifferently. "Insurance fraud for that amount of money is a serious offense. Plus I found out through colleagues from neighboring counties that he had already tried a similar scheme 2 years ago in Midland City. There was a mysterious fire there too, and the damage estimate was inflated many times over." "Fool," Cordelia snorted scornfully. He thought he could keep everyone around him stupid. There are a lot of people like that, Danby agreed. People think insurance companies just write checks without checking the paperwork. The truth is, we look at every case under a microscope. I sat at the table and ate in silence, half listening to their conversation. For 76 years of my life, I had learned a simple truth. In such family conversations, it is better to keep quiet. My opinion doesn't interest anyone here, and any attempts to interfere with the conversation are met with poorly concealed irritation on Cordelia's part. "Turn on the news, Danby," my daughter said. "I wonder what's going on in the world." Danby reached for the remote control and turned on the small television that stood on a separate nightstand against the wall between the kitchen and the living room. The familiar face of the local evening newscaster appeared on the screen, a young woman with a professional smile, impeccable hair, and a smooth, well-pitched voice. "Good evening, dear viewers. Here is the news summary for today, Sunday, March 23rd. The top story of the day is that local businessman Robert Hutchins has been found dead in Sioux City. The body of the 43-year-old owner of Hutchins & Partners, a construction company, was found this morning by a city utility officer in the decedent's automobile in a vacant lot in the industrial district of the city, near the old auto parts plant. According to preliminary forensic reports, the death occurred last night, between 18 and 22 o'clock. The cause and circumstances of death are being investigated, and further tests have been scheduled. The Sioux City Police Department is asking possible witnesses or anyone with any information about the last days of Mr. Hutchins' life to contact the hotline. "Another murder," Cordelia grumbled, setting her fork aside. "The city gets more dangerous every year. I remember when I was a kid, nothing like this ever happened. People walked the streets quietly, even late at night, not afraid of anyone." "Hutchins," Danby said thoughtfully, chewing slowly. "I think I've seen that name somewhere. Maybe he was a client of ours, or maybe I've seen his name on some paperwork." "Do you know all your clients by sight?" Cordelia asked in surprise. "Not all of them, of course, but some names are memorable," Danby explained. "Especially if the case was complicated or problematic. In the construction business, there are often disputes with insurance payments, equipment breakdowns, construction accidents, stolen materials." I continued to finish my portion in silence as I listened to their discussion. Robert Hutchins. The name didn't really mean anything to me, although in a small town like Sioux City, sooner or later everyone hears something about each other. But in recent years, there have been a lot of new faces, new businesses, new companies in town. Old acquaintances have gradually died off, moved on to children in other states, or simply lost touch with each other. "What do you think might have happened to this Hutchins?" Cordelia asked her husband, clearly interested in the crime story. "It's hard to say without more details," Danby answered cautiously, who by virtue of his profession was accustomed to analyzing facts rather than speculating. "But if it's an entrepreneur in the construction industry, it's probably something to do with business. Bad deals, debts to suppliers or customers, competition, perhaps problems with contractors. Or maybe a random robbery," Cordelia suggested. "He was driving late at night. He was attacked by robbers." "It's unlikely," Danby shook his head. "Street robbers don't usually mess with dead bodies. They take the valuables and run away, leaving the victim at the scene. But here, according to the report, the body was carefully placed in a car and transported to a vacant lot. It's more like an organized murder, possibly a demonstration." "That's creepy," Cordelia shuddered. "What if it was a serial killer or a maniac?" "It's too early to make such conclusions," Danby objected. "Serial criminals usually act according to a certain pattern. They have their own recognizable handwriting. And here we are dealing with only one case so far." Talk of crime and murder did not make me hungry, but I continued to eat my dinner methodically. At my age, you get used to death being a frequent and unwelcome guest in the news, Every week there are reports of someone passing away in the newspapers, either someone I know or just someone of my generation. Dad, you haven't said a word today, Cordelia said, noticing that I hadn't said a word for several minutes. At least you could ask me how we were doing at work, what was going on in our lives. I lifted my eyes from my plate and looked at my daughter. Cordelia looked tired after a week of work, dark hair disheveled, deep shadows under her eyes, chronic fatigue on her face. The work of a senior dispatcher in a transportation company required constant mental tension, quick decision-making, the ability to communicate with a variety of people, from polite customers to rude truckers. "How are things at work?" I asked obediently, even though I knew the answer would be predictable. "Just fine," Cordelia said with ill-concealed sarcasm. "We work until we drop from morning to night. We don't have enough money for anything normal, and you sit in your house and don't worry about anything. You read the papers, watch TV, walk in the garden." "Cordelia, don't," Danby interjected gently, sensing that the conversation was taking an unpleasant turn. "Your father was just tired after a long day." "Tired of what?" she snapped, putting down her fork and turning to face me. "From reading the papers, watching television programs, walking in my own garden. It was a long-standing and painful theme in our relationship. After Margaret's death, the relationship between me and my daughter had deteriorated markedly and continued to deteriorate with each passing year. Cordelia thought that since retirement I had become too withdrawn, too indifferent to the family's life, that I should take more interest in their problems, help them with advice or, better still, money. But the truth was that my few attempts to participate in their affairs were met without enthusiasm and often ended with reproaches that I was minding my own business. "We're really in serious financial trouble, Dad," Cordelia continued, clearly determined to express all the frustration she had accumulated over the past few months. "The mortgage on the house, the loan on my car, the loan on Danby's car. Utilities are going up every month, groceries too. Danby's working his ass off, working overtime, taking on extra cases and still barely enough money for the essentials." Danby coughed awkwardly, clearly not wanting to discuss the details of the family budget in my presence. He was a secretive man who didn't like to bring personal problems to the public eye. "Honey, we shouldn't burden your father with our financial problems," he said, casting a warning glance at his wife. "Why not?" Cordelia said hotly. "He's his own father, a relative. You could at least show some sympathy, ask what you can do to help." I finished the cooled tea and carefully put the cup on the saucer. It was absolutely useless to argue with my daughter. She had long ago and finally decided that I am a selfish and indifferent old man who thinks only about his own peace and comfort. I wasn't going to change her mind, and I didn't see any point in it. "Thanks for dinner," I said, getting up from the table. "I'm going to read the paper before I go to bed." "Sure, go read your paper," Cordelia said with resentment in her voice. "The important thing is that nothing bothers you, that no one disturbs your peace." I headed for the desk in the corner of the living room, not responding to her lunge. It was my usual spot for evening reading. Next to it was a comfortable leather armchair from my late father. A floor lamp with a green glass shade provided good light, and everything I needed was always close at hand. I opened the top drawer of the desk and pulled a bunch of keys out of my pocket. 3 keys on a simple steel ring, one for the front door of the house, one for the gate and the shed in the yard, and a third key that Cordelia and Danby didn't even know existed. He carefully placed the bunch in the drawer next to the ballpoint pens, simple pencils, spare reading glasses, and other useful little things. "Good night," I said, slowly closing the drawer and making sure it fit tightly. "Good night, Dad," Cordelia said in a noticeably less annoyed tone. "Have a good rest," Danby added. But I noticed that my son-in-law was watching me with a keen, scrutinizing gaze, particularly focused on the way I'd put my keys in the desk drawer. Something flashed in his gray eyes behind his glasses that I strongly disliked. A too close and interested interest in my daily habits and rituals. That evening, however, I didn't pay much attention to that observation. Very wrongly. After dinner, we went about our evening business. Cordelia went to wash dishes in the kitchen, muttering something unhappy about how hard it was to work for a transportation company. Danby helped her clear the table, putting plates and utensils in the dishwasher. I was in the chair by the desk with the evening paper, as usual. Tired as a dog, Cordelia sighed, wiping her hands with a kitchen towel. I have to be at work at 7 in the morning again. I think we'll stay the night, Dad. It's too late to drive across town. Of course you can stay, I nodded, and the guest room was ready. It didn't happen often, but sometimes my daughter and son-in-law would stay overnight, especially when dinner ran late or the weather was bad. The house had a special guest bedroom on the second floor, a small but cozy room with a double bed and an old dresser. Thank you, Danby said. We'll leave early tomorrow morning so we won't be in the way. Around 10:30, Cordelia finished the dishes and headed upstairs. I'm going to take a shower and go to bed, she announced. Danby, don't stay up too long on the laptop. I'll work for another half hour, my brother-in-law said, pulling the laptop out of his bag. I need to finish the report on that arson case. Danby sat down at the kitchen table, opened the computer and pretended to work, but I, sitting in the chair with my back to the kitchen, could feel his eyes on me. He was watching me. Soon the muffled sounds of the television came from the guest bedroom upstairs. Cordelia had some late-night movie on, like she always did before bed. The sounds of a shower, then silence. After half an hour, it was clear that she had fallen asleep. Around 11 p.m., I put the paper down, got up from the chair, and stretched. I'm going to bed, I said to Danby. Don't stay up too late. Good night, my brother-in-law said, keeping his eyes on the laptop screen. I went up to my bedroom, changed into my pajamas, brushed my teeth, and lay down. I turned on the little TV, an old Humphrey Bogart movie on, but I watched absent-mindedly, listening more to the sounds in the house. Danby was indeed alone downstairs, and it was exactly what he'd been waiting for. Sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open, Danby Clutterbuck pondered the problems that were getting more serious by the day. $8,000 in debt, an amount that had turned his life into a nightmare. It all started 6 months ago, last October. A work colleague, Chief Inspector Mike Thornton, invited him to a private poker club. It's a decent crowd, Mike urged. Doctors, lawyers, businessmen, they play cultured, gentlemanly. A good way to relax after work and make a little extra money. The club was located in the basement of the Golden Oak restaurant in the center of town. Nothing fancy. A few poker tables, dim lights, leather chairs, a bar in the corner. Solid, middle-aged men gathered on Thursdays after work to play a game or two and discuss business. Danby turned out to be a pretty good player. Years as an insurance inspector had taught him how to read people, spot lies, analyze behavior. Those skills came in handy at the poker table. He was able to control his emotions, did not show his cards with his facial expressions, carefully watched the gestures and facial expressions of his opponents. The first 3 months were successful. Danby rarely lost more than $100 a night, but more often won from $200 to $400. By New Year's Eve, he had accumulated a decent sum, almost $3,000 in net profit. Cordelia knew nothing about these profits. Danby told his wife that he was late at work because of difficult cases or meeting with colleagues. He spent the money on gifts to his wife, on updating his closet, on a nice dinner at a restaurant on weekends. Cordelia was happy with the improved standard of living and didn't ask too many questions. But in January, his luck began to turn away. At first, Danby didn't pay much attention to it. In gambling, streaks of luck and bad luck are normal. You just need to wait out the black streak. Do not lose composure. Play intelligently and cautiously. However, The losses continued. In January, he lost about $1,000. In February, another $1,500. By early March, all the accumulated winnings evaporated, and Danby began to play in debt. Organizers of the club, the Carlson brothers, who owned several restaurants and bars in the city, willingly provided credit to regular customers. The terms were quite reasonable: 10% interest per month, deferred payment of up to 2 months. Danby borrowed a little at a time, $500, $1,000. He was sure that he would soon break even. After all, he's a good player, he knows the rules, he can count cards and read people. He just needed a little more time. But time worked against him. By mid-March, the debt had grown to $8,000. The Carlson brothers began to show impatience. First, it was polite reminders after the game, then phone calls to home and work, then personal visits. "Danby, we respect you, you're a good man," the older of the brothers, Rick Carlson, said as he showed up in the parking lot outside the insurance company's office. "But the money has to be paid back in a reasonable amount of time. It's business, nothing personal." "I understand," Danby replied, glancing nervously at the office windows. "Another week, 2 weeks tops, and I'll pay it all back." "Good. But we're running out of time. We have a reputation, you know. If one client doesn't pay, other clients start to think it's okay not to pay." Last week, the tone of the conversation changed. Rick Carlson called Danby's house Saturday morning while Cordelia was in the shower. "Listen, buddy, my patience is wearing thin," he said without his usual politeness. "I've got people who specialize in dealing with debtors. I don't want them involved in our case." "Give me a little more time," Danby pleaded. "I'll find the money. By the end of the month. That's the deadline." The end of March was less than a week away. Danby tried every possible option. A bank loan would take too long to process and verify. Loans from friends and colleagues were out of the question. No one would give $8,000 without an explanation, and the truth could not be told. Credit cards were already maxed out. Sell the car? But then I'd have to explain to Cordelia where the money went. Besides, the used Honda was worth $12,000 at the most, and the loan for it hadn't been paid off yet. That's when Danby turned his attention to his father-in-law. Birdwhistle, Nashville had sold his house about 5 years ago, shortly before Danby married Cordelia. Danby remembered that house, a 2-story brick cottage in an upscale Sioux City neighborhood, with a large lot, old oak trees, and a well-kept garden. Real estate in that neighborhood wasn't cheap, at least $150,000 and probably even more. Where had the old man put that money? Cordelia said that her father lived very modestly. He dresses simply, takes the bus, buys groceries in inexpensive stores. His only expenses are books and subscriptions to a few newspapers and magazines. If a person spends a maximum of $1,000 a month and received $150,000 or more from the sale of the house, where is the rest of the money? It is logical to assume that they are in the bank on deposit or in the home safe. Danby has tried several times to discreetly inquire of Cordelia about his father's financial situation. "Wasn't Dad thinking of moving into a home for the elderly?" he asked at breakfast one day. "It's hard for him to keep such a big house by himself." "No way!" Cordelia was indignant. "He's attached to his house. He'd never agree to move. Besides, he might not have enough money for a decent nursing home." "But he sold his old house, didn't he? There should have been a decent amount left over." Cordelia shrugged. "I have no idea how much money he has. He never talks about it. All I know is that he lives modestly and doesn't complain about anything. Asking him directly didn't get me anywhere. The old man always avoided talking about money. When asked if he needed financial help, he replied that he could manage on his own. He never mentioned anything about his savings. But tonight, Danby noticed an important detail: the way the old man put his keys away in his desk drawer. The movements were familiar, ritualistic. He'd obviously been doing it every day for years. Danby scrutinized the bunch as Birdwhistle pulled it from his pocket. 3 keys on a simple steel ring. 1 large one, obviously for the front door. The second smaller one was probably for a gate or a shed. And the third key looked unusual, small, flat, with a distinctive head. Danby had seen similar ones in his work. Keys to bank safes and rented safe deposit boxes. If the old man had a safe deposit box, there might well be money or valuables in there. We just have to find out which bank and under which number. Danby looked at his watch. It was 12:30 at night. It was quiet upstairs. Cordelia had been asleep for over an hour, and the old man had shown no signs of life. The television in his bedroom had turned off, which meant the auto-off timer had gone off. Now was the time to act. Danby closed the laptop and rose quietly from his chair. The parquet under his feet creaked treacherously, but not very loudly. It was normal in old houses. The wood was drying out, cracks were appearing. He walked over to the desk and examined it carefully. It was solid oak with 3 drawers. The top one was the smallest, where the keys were kept. The middle one was larger. The bottom one was the most spacious. No locks on the drawers. Danby listened to the sounds in the house. Quiet. Only the ticking of the wall clock in the kitchen and the barely audible hum of the refrigerator. He carefully grasped the handle of the top drawer and pulled slowly. The drawer opened silently, as if the mechanism had been recently oiled. There was order inside. A bunch of keys lay in the most prominent place, next to ballpoint pens, pencils, reading glasses in a case, and a small flashlight. Everything was neatly laid out, each thing in its place. Danby carefully picked up a bunch of keys and held them up to the light of the desk lamp. Yes, the third key was definitely to a bank safe. He took a picture of it with his phone, being careful not to use the flash. Tomorrow he would show the picture to people he knew in the banking industry. There were only 4 major banks in Sioux City that provided safe deposit box rental services. Figuring out which one the key belonged to wouldn't be difficult. Danby was about to put the keys back when he suddenly noticed something else interesting in the far corner of the drawer. An envelope. A plain white mailing envelope, quite thick, lay in the farthest corner of the drawer, half hidden behind a box of spare batteries. There was no writing on the envelope, but it was carefully taped all around and obviously contained something important to the owner. Danby carefully pulled the envelope out and turned it in his hands. The paper was old, yellowed by time, and the glue had lost its freshness. The envelope had been there for years. Curiosity fought caution, but curiosity won out. He picked up the edge of the tape with his fingernail and began to open the envelope carefully, being careful not to tear the paper. The glue yielded easily. It must have been sealed a long time ago. Inside were documents and photographs. Danby took them out and held them up to the light of the desk lamp, covering them with the palm of his hand so as not to create too bright a spot. The first was a 10 by 15 centimeter black and white photograph. The quality of the photo was not bad, despite its age. Judging by the style and grain, it had been taken in the 50s or early 60s. The photo showed a man in his 30s, wearing a dark suit, getting out of an automobile. The face was clearly visible, and Danby easily recognized him as a young Birdwhistle Nashville. The same facial features, the same cut of the eyes, though the hair was dark and thick. But that was not what struck Danby. It was what was happening in the background of the photograph. At another car, about 20 feet from the Birdwhistle, 2 men in dark clothing were pulling something large, wrapped in a tarp or dark cloth from the open trunk. The size and shape of the bundle left no doubt that it was a human body. The scene was filmed by an obviously hidden camera. The angle is poor. The shooting was done from a distance, perhaps from the window of a building or from another car. But the faces of everyone involved are quite clear. Danby turned the photograph over. On the back was written in pencil, August 23rd, 52nd year, warehouses on Industrial Street. His hands began to tremble. Danby put the first picture aside and picked up the next. The second picture showed the same young bird whistle, but in a different setting. He was standing beside an expensive automobile. Judging by its shape, it was a Cadillac from the early 50s, talking to a man in an expensive coat and hat. The conversation was clearly businesslike as Birdwhistle held out an envelope to his interlocutor, who in return handed him a small suitcase. On the back, September 10th, 52nd year. Payment for work, $15,000. $15,000 in the year 52nd was a lot of money, comparable to $100,000 in today's prices. The third picture was even more shocking. Birdwhistle was driving a dark automobile, with another man sitting beside him in the front seat and a long object neatly wrapped in cloth lying on the back seat. Judging from the size and shape, it was a hunting rifle or shotgun. October 18th, year 52, preparing for an operation at the Grand Palace Hotel. Danby frantically went through the rest of the photos. There were about a dozen of them, all black and white, all dated between the years 51st and 54th. Each one showed a young Birdwhistle in various situations that left no doubt as to the nature of his activities. Encounters with suspicious people in deserted places, transmitting money and weapons, surveillance of victims. In one photo, he was even captured entering a house with a small bag in his hand, and on the back was written, "Witness Elimination, James Collins." But the pictures were only the beginning. Danby put the pictures aside and took up the papers. The first was a clipping from the Sioux City Herald newspaper dated September 15th, 52nd. The headline read, "Missing Businessman Found Dead in River." The body of Robert McDaniel, 36-year-old owner of a grocery store chain, was discovered yesterday morning by fishermen in the Chattanooga River, 20 miles from the city. According to the coroner, Mr. McDaniel had been in the water for at least a week. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. Police are considering a homicide. Mr. McDaniel disappeared on August 27th when he did not return home from work. Danby compared the date of the newspaper with the date on the first photograph. August 23rd, the shooting in the warehouses. August 27th, the disappearance of McDaniel. September 15th, the discovery of the body. The next clipping was dated October 25th, 52nd. Hotel murder remains unsolved. The Sioux City police are still investigating the murder of Charles Hendricks, which occurred at the Grand Palace Hotel on October 18th. Mr. Hendricks, a prominent attorney and community leader, was found dead in his hotel room with a gunshot wound to the heart. No witnesses to the crime have been located. Detectives are asking anyone with information about the last days of Mr. Hendricks's life to contact police. October 18th was the date written on the back of the photograph of Birdwhistle preparing for an operation at the Grand Palace Hotel. Danby went through the newspaper clippings one by one, and the picture became clearer and clearer. Dozens of murders over several years. Businessmen, lawyers, witnesses in important cases, petty criminals. The victims were diverse, but they had one thing in common. They had all been killed professionally, without witnesses, and not a single crime had been solved. And in the envelope was photographic evidence of who was behind the murders. The last document was a fake ID. An Illinois driver's license in the name of William Arthur Stone, issued in the year 51. The photo was of a young Birdwhistle, but with a different haircut and glasses. The quality of the forgery was excellent. Even under close scrutiny, it was hard to see the signs of forgery. On the back of the card was written in small handwriting, "Working name for operations in Chicago and the suburbs. Use only when absolutely necessary." Danby had been studying the documents for about half an hour when he heard a light creaking of floorboards upstairs. He froze, listening. Could it be Cordelia getting up to go to the bathroom? Or maybe it was just the house breathing. Old wooden structures had a habit of creaking at night from temperature fluctuations. But the creaking was repeated, And this time Danby realized that someone was coming down the second-floor hallway, slowly, carefully, trying not to make too much noise. His heart beat faster. Danby quickly began putting the photos and documents back into the envelope. He should have put everything back where it belonged and pretended it hadn't happened. But it was too late. I went downstairs and stopped in the doorway watching my son-in-law. Danby sat at my desk surrounded by documents from an envelope he wasn't authorized to touch. Pictures of my youth were scattered across the desk, and his face read horror at what he was seeing. Interesting. In all my years, no one had ever shown such an unhealthy curiosity about my personal belongings. Cordelia had never gone through my drawers, and previous guests had been content with what they'd been offered. "Can't sleep?" I asked quietly, entering the living room. Danby jumped up like a stunned man and began frantically picking up the pictures from the floor where they had fallen in surprise. I was looking for a pen," he mumbled. "I wanted to write down a phone number." "What's the phone number at 1 o'clock in the morning?" I asked, coming closer. My son-in-law licked his lips nervously. "The client called, left a message on the answering machine. I remembered and decided to write it down before I forget." I looked at one of the photos that lay face up on the table. It was from 53, where I was handing an envelope of money to a man named Garcia. Those were the good times. Simple orders, honest payment, no questions asked. "That's an interesting picture," I said. "What do you think of it?" "I don't think anything," Danby answered quickly, shoving the last of the photos into the envelope. "It's none of my business. I was just looking for a pen and accidentally—" "You accidentally opened a sealed envelope?" I picked up one photo off the floor that he'd missed and accidentally studied the contents for half an hour. Danby realized he was caught. He had panic in his eyes. "Look, I'll put it all back and forget about what I saw," he began hastily. "I don't want any trouble. I won't say anything to anyone." "It's too late," I said calmly. "You've already seen it." I took the envelope from his trembling hands and leisurely flipped through the contents. All the documents were there. The photographs, the newspaper clippings, the forged documents. Good thing I didn't keep the really important stuff here. "Sit down." I nodded to the chair next to the desk. "We'll talk." "I'd better go to bed," Danby tried to object. "I have to get up early tomorrow." "Sit down," I repeated, my voice a tone that left no room for argument. Danby lowered himself into the chair. I sat down across from him, placing the envelope carefully on the table between us. "Tell me about your debts," I said. "What debts?" He tried to act surprised, but it was unconvincing. "Danby," I said calmly, "let's not waste time with nonsense. People don't go through people's drawers in the middle of the night for no good reason. You're looking for money, so you owe someone. How much and to whom?" My son-in-law sat silent, struggling with himself. I could see the thoughts racing through his head, denying, lying, making excuses. $8,000, I suggested. Gambling debts? He flinched, and I realized I'd hit the mark. "How do you know that?" he blurted out. "I've been studying people for years," I replied. "It was an important part of my job. You've been nervous the last few weeks, avoiding phone calls in our presence, constantly checking your messages. Classic signs of someone who owes someone big." Danby lowered his head. "Okay, yeah, I owe $8,000 to the people at the poker club, but I won't tell anyone about these pictures, I swear. Forget what it was." "Oh, who exactly?" I ignored his requests. "The Carlson brothers. They run the club." "Serious people?" "Yeah, very serious." "What happens if you don't pay on time?" Danby swallowed. "Nothing good. They've already started making threats." I nodded. The situation was understandable and fairly typical. A weak-willed man had gotten into debt trying to make easy money, and now he was paying for his stupidity. "How much time do you have?" "The end of the month. Less than a week to go." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark garden. The old oaks swayed in the wind, their silhouettes reminding me of when I was young and full of energy. Back then, such problems were solved quickly and easily. "I have a suggestion," I said, turning to Danby. "You forget forever what you saw tonight. I'll take care of your debt problem." He stared at me in disbelief. "Really?" "Pretty much, but there are conditions." "Anything you want," he agreed quickly. "First, never, ever, ever say a word to anyone about the contents of that envelope. Not to Cordelia, not to friends, not to colleagues, not to the police. One hint, one careless phrase, and our deal is canceled immediately." I paused, letting him know I meant it. "The second condition is that you stop gambling. Forever. No cards, no betting, no casinos. If I find out about the violation of this rule, the consequences will be very unpleasant." "Understood," Danby nodded. "Third, we never discuss this conversation again. For the rest of us, nothing happened tonight. You got up for a drink of water, and I came downstairs because I couldn't sleep. We chatted about the weather and went to our rooms." "That's good." I gave him my hand. "Shake on it, then." Danby shook my hand. He had a weak, sweaty grip, not like the real men I'd had to deal with in my youth. "The money will be deposited in your account tomorrow afternoon," I said. $8,000. Where it comes from is none of your business." "Thank you," he whispered. "I don't know how to thank you." "Silence," I said briefly. "It's the only thanks I need." I took the envelope and carefully placed it back in the drawer. Then I closed the drawer and turned to my son-in-law, who was still sitting in the chair with a confused look. "And remember one more thing, Danby," I said quietly. "What you saw in the pictures happened a long time ago. It was a different life, a different time, a different person. But some skills, once acquired, don't go away. They stay with you for the rest of your days." I headed for the stairs, but at the bottom I stopped and turned to Danby, who was still sitting in his chair, trying to comprehend what had happened. "One more thing," I said. "Tomorrow morning, you act completely natural. Cordelia shouldn't suspect anything. Women sense falseness better than men." "Understood," he nodded. "And don't you start treating me any differently. No subservience, no fear in my eyes. I'm still the same boring old man I was before tonight." "All right, then." "Good night, son-in-law," I said with a touch of irony and went upstairs. Leaving Danby alone in the half-dark living room, I went upstairs to my bedroom. I heard him sit downstairs for another 10 minutes digesting the shock of what he'd learned. Finally, he got up and walked quietly to Cordelia's guest room. I went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I had to think back to times I hadn't thought about in years. The 50s, early 60s, a different era, different rules of the game. Back then, life was simpler in many ways. Order, fulfillment, payment, no unnecessary questions, no remorse. But those times are long gone. I left that world in '64 when I realized I was becoming too visible to the authorities. The FBI was getting serious about organized crime. Investigative techniques were improving. Risks were rising. It was time to call it quits. In 13 years of work, I'd saved enough money to ensure a secure old age. I bought a house, married Margaret, who knew nothing about my past, and got a job as an electrician in a factory. The quiet, measured life of a law-abiding citizen. And now, more than half a century later, the past reminded itself through the curiosity of a hapless son-in-law. In the morning, I got up at the usual time, at 7:30. I made coffee, fried some scrambled eggs, and watched the morning news on TV. Cordelia and Danby woke up around 8. I went out into the garden to give them a chance to eat breakfast in peace. I watched through the window as my son-in-law tried to act natural. He was doing a pretty good job, at least Cordelia didn't suspect anything. Danby was drinking coffee, reading the newspaper, answering his wife's questions about his plans for the work week. The usual family scene. "Good morning," I said, entering the house after an hour's work in the garden. "Good morning," Danby replied, meeting my gaze for a moment and then quickly averting his eyes. "How did you sleep?" I asked, sitting down at the table and pouring myself a cup of coffee. "Good. And you?" "Not so good. Got up in the middle of the night, couldn't sleep. Went downstairs and got some water. You weren't sleeping either, I remember." "Yeah, I wanted to write down a client's cell phone number," Danby said. "I remembered in the middle of the night and decided to write it down right away so I wouldn't forget." "I see. Memory's not what it used to be at our age." Cordelia listened to our exchange of remarks, flipping through the pages of the magazine. For her, it was just an ordinary conversation about everyday trivialities, nothing suspicious. "By the way," I added, turning to Danby, "if you need a pen, you can always get one from the desk drawer. There's a couple of them in there." "Thank you. I'll keep that in mind," he replied, and I saw him tense up a little at the mention of the drawer. At 9 in the morning, they were ready to leave. Cordelia kissed my cheek and Danby shook my hand. "I'll see you next Sunday," my daughter said. "Goodbye," I replied. "Take care on the roads." "Have a good week," Danby added. After they left, I put the dishes away, took a shower, and changed into my weekend suit. I had a visit to the bank. First National Bank was located in the center of town, in a solid red brick building. I had been a customer of the bank for over 40 years and had a certain amount of respect from the staff. Mr. Nashville, a punctual retiree who paid his taxes regularly and never made trouble. "Good morning, Mr. Nashville." Manager Susan Clark, a young woman in her 30s who had been servicing my account for the past 5 years, greeted me. "What can I do for you?" "Good morning, Susan. I need to make a cash withdrawal of $8,000. "Sure. Big purchase?" "I'm helping my son-in-law with an emergency expense," I replied. "Family stuff." "I see. Give me a minute to check your account balance." Susan typed something on the keyboard, looked at the computer screen. "Everything's fine. Would you like large bills?" "Yeah, in hundreds, if that's okay." "No problem. You'll just have to fill out a declaration. It's a mandatory procedure when withdrawing more than $5,000. I filled out the paperwork, listing the purpose of the withdrawal as family expenses. In 10 minutes, I had 80 bills of $100 each in my pocket. On the way home, I stopped by the post office. I had a rented safe deposit box there that even Cordelia didn't know existed. The box held some documents and a small amount of cash, just in case. I took a plain envelope out of the box and put the money for Danby in it. Then I wrote Danby's address and instructions for the courier service on a separate sheet of paper. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I called for a courier to deliver the envelope to the office of the insurance company where my son-in-law worked. Anonymous delivery, no trace leading back to me. "Hand it to Mr. Clutterbuck," I told the courier. "No one else." "You got it, sir. Danby will have the money by 3 o'clock this afternoon. That would be enough time for him to go to the bank, withdraw his savings, add it to the $8,000 he had received, and pay off his creditors tonight." I spent the rest of the afternoon in the garden reading a book in the shade of an old oak tree. About 4 o'clock, Danby called. "Hello?" I answered. This is Danby. I got a package." "What package?" I asked innocently. "Well, some paperwork for work, urgent documents." "I see. I hope everything's okay?" "Yeah, everything's great. Thank you so much for your help with, work stuff." "You're welcome. We're family. Goodbye. I'll see you later." Okay. Danby got the money and realized he had to keep his mouth shut. Now I could relax and enjoy the quiet. In the evening, I cooked myself a light dinner, watched some TV, and got ready for bed around 10 o'clock. But first I decided to watch the late news. "And now for a rundown of the day's events," said the anchorwoman of the evening program. Local businessman David Griffin was found dead in Sioux City. The body of the 60-year-old owner of Griffin Motors Auto Dealership was found this morning in his office by an employee who had come to work. According to preliminary reports, the death occurred late last night. I raised my eyebrows. Interesting. The second murder of a businessman in a week. The cause of death is being investigated, the anchorwoman continued. The police have not ruled out robbery. This is the second mysterious murder of a businessman in Sioux City in recent times. Last Sunday, Robert Hutchins, owner of a construction company, was found dead. 2 murders in 1 week. Pretty unusual for a quiet Sioux City. I wonder if there's a connection between the victims or if it's just a coincidence. None of my business, though. I haven't been interested in crime news professionally for a long time. I turned off the TV and went up to the bedroom. Tomorrow will be the usual Monday of an ordinary retiree. Watering flowers, reading the newspaper, a walk in the park. The next morning I woke up at the usual time and first thing I did was turn on the radio to listen to the news. Griffin's murder was the top story. Sioux City police continue to investigate the murder of car dealership owner David Griffin. Investigators say the perpetrator entered the office through the back door, followed by an altercation with the owner. The motives for the crime are unclear. The safe in the office was not opened and no valuables were stolen. Police are asking witnesses to contact the hotline. That's odd. If the safe wasn't opened and nothing was stolen, what was the motive? Maybe the killer was someone he knew and it was about personal accounts? Well, that's not my problem. I have more important things to do, like following up on Danby's behavior. Around noon, I got a call from Cordelia. "Hi, Dad. How's it going?" "Fine. How are you?" "Pretty good, too. Listen, Danby was kind of weird last night. Came home in a good mood, said he'd solved a work problem. Then he tossed and turned all night. Couldn't sleep. Maybe he's stressed out about something. I don't know. He's been a little jumpy lately, whether it's work problems or something else." "Working for an insurance company is stressful," I said. "You have to deal with unpleasant situations all the time." "I guess. By the way, have you seen the news? There's another murder in town." "Yeah, I heard. It's a sad story." "It worries me, Dad. 2 murders in a week is not normal for our town." "Sioux City's growing, Cordelia. More people, more problems. It's only natural." "Maybe. But it's still scary. Good thing you live in a quiet neighborhood." "I'm careful. I always lock my doors at night." "That's right. Take care of yourself." "You too." After talking to my daughter, I went for a walk. I walked down the familiar streets and thought about how fast the world is changing. It used to be that people knew each other, and crime was rare. Now the city has turned into a typical American metropolis with all the problems that come with it. That evening, I watched the news again. The investigation into Griffin's murder had reached a dead end. No witnesses, no evidence. The police had come up with all sorts of theories, but they were all thinly veiled. Before bed, the phone rang. Danby. "Good evening," said a familiar voice, but it sounded strained. "Evening. How are you?" "I'm good. Did you see the news, by the way?" "Yeah, it's a terrible story about the car dealer." "Very bad," Danby agreed, and I heard something strange in his voice. "Crime is on the rise in the city. Unfortunately, yes, we have to be more careful." "Yeah, careful." Short pause. "Anything else?" I asked. "No, nothing. Just, wanted to say good night." "Good night, Danby." I hung up the phone and thought. There was a strange note in my son-in-law's voice. Suspicion? Fear? Or just the paranoia of a man who had learned too much? More likely, Danby was beginning to connect my past to the recent murders in town. Logical, but wrong. I retired a long time ago, and I'm not going back to my old ways. Well, let him think what he wants, as long as he doesn't say anything, and fear is a good motivator for silence. I went to bed satisfied with my day. Danby's problem solved, money handed over, family peace restored. True, my son-in-law now knows my secret, but that's a good thing. Now he'll treat me with the respect I deserve. And the coincidence of Griffin's murder, well, sometimes life throws up interesting surprises. I had nothing to do with it, but if Danby thinks otherwise, so be it. Knowledge is power. and the fear of knowing is an even greater power. For the next few weeks, I watched Danby with a certain interest. Our late-night conversation had made exactly the impression I had hoped it would. My son-in-law lived in a constant state of tension, knowing my secret but unable to do anything about it. Every Sunday dinner became a challenge for him. He sat at my table, ate my food, participated in family conversations, but I saw him flinch every time our gazes met. That's great. Fear is a great motivator for sticking to agreements. "Danby, you seem strange tonight," Cordelia said after another Sunday dinner as they were getting home. "You don't say anything all the way home, and you're not answering any questions." "Just tired," my brother-in-law answered, avoiding looking in my direction. "I had a lot to do at work." I walked them to the car as I usually did. "Take care," I said, closing the car door behind Cordelia. "Goodbye, Dad," my daughter replied. "See you later," Danby muttered, starting the engine quickly. As I watched their car disappear around the corner, I felt satisfied. The situation was under my complete control, but a few days later Cordelia called me with questions. "Dad, is everything okay between you and Danby?" she asked bluntly. "Of course. Why?" "He's been acting kind of weird lately. He's quiet at home and he seems to be having problems at work, and he's been treating you differently." "Different in what way?" I asked, though I knew exactly what I was talking about. "Avoiding eye contact, agreeing with every word you say, looking tense when you're around. It's like she's afraid." "Maybe he's worried about his job. The insurance business isn't easy right now." "Maybe," Cordelia agreed uncertainly, "but I don't think it's just the job." I listened to my daughter and realized that Danby wasn't doing a very good job of playing the role of the man who didn't know anything. A woman's intuition is a dangerous thing. Cordelia felt that something had changed, although she didn't realize what it was. "If you want to talk to him," I suggested, "maybe he'll tell me what's bothering him." "I've tried. He just brushes it off and says it's fine." "Then give him time. Men sometimes need to work out their own problems." After that conversation, I knew I had to take action. Danby was causing problems with his behavior, and it could lead to unwanted questions. That evening, I called him at home. "Hello?" a familiar voice answered. "Good evening, Danby. This is Bird Whistle." "Good evening." He sounded tense. "How are things at work?" Fine." "Good. By the way, Cordelia called today. She's worried about you. She says you've been nervous lately." Pause. "It's just a lot of work," Danby said. "I understand. But women are very sensitive to mood swings. Cordelia's starting to ask questions." "What kind of questions?" "About why you've changed, why you're avoiding me, why you look scared in my presence." Another pause. "I'm trying to act normal," he objected weakly. "You're not trying hard enough. Remember our pact. No one has to suspect anything. And Cordelia already suspects." "What am I supposed to do?" "Relax. I'm not a monster, Danby. I'm just a retired guy helping my son-in-law with his financial problems. Act like it." "I will." "One more thing. If Cordelia insists on talking, tell her some plausible story. Work problems, stress, fatigue, anything but the truth." "Got it. I'll see you Sunday." After that conversation, Danby's behavior improved a little, but not much. He was still inhibited in my presence, though he tried to hide it. At the next family dinner, I decided to see how well he had learned his lesson. "Danby," I said to him over dessert, "how's it going with that arson you told me about?" He flinched as if I'd electrocuted him. "What arson?" he asked quickly. "That electronics store. The owner was trying to get insurance for a product that didn't exist." "Oh yeah." He breathed a sigh of relief. "Case closed. Fraudster's been arrested." "Justice has been served," I said with a slight smile. "Yeah." Danby nodded, and I saw him swallow. Cordelia watched our exchange of remarks with bewilderment. "You're both kind of weird today," she said. "You sound like actors who've forgotten the lines." "Just tired," I replied. "It's normal at our age." "Dad?" You're 76 years old, not 90, and Danby's not an old man either. Still, I said calmly, sometimes fatigue takes its toll. Cordelia didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. After they left, I sat in the chair for a long time, thinking about the situation. Danby wasn't doing a good job of playing the role of the man who knew nothing. Sooner or later, Cordelia would get to the truth, or at least part of the truth. Something had to be done. The next week, I called Danby again. I think we should meet, I said. Talk in person. About what? I could hear the fear in his voice. About moving on. You're causing problems with your behavior. I'm trying. Not enough. Meet me tomorrow night at the park on Main Street, 7 o'clock by the fountain. Okay. The next night, I got to the park ahead of schedule. It was a good spot. Crowded enough to make conversation seem casual, but quiet enough that no one could hear us. Danby showed up at 7 sharp. He didn't look well, pale, gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes. Sit down. I nodded to the bench next to the fountain. He sat down, leaving a decent distance between us. You don't look well, I remarked. I haven't slept well since the other night, he admitted. I understand, but it'll pass. In time. I don't know. Every time I look at you, I think of those pictures. And when you think of those pictures, do you think of the recent murders in town? Danby turned on me. Did you have something to do with it? To what exactly? Griffin, the car dealer. I gave him a long look. Danby, I haven't done what I did when I was younger in years. I'm retired. I grow roses and read newspapers. But coincidence. Coincidences happen, especially in big cities. And the money? Where'd you get $8,000 so fast? From my bank account. I had some savings from the sale of my old house. Danby was quiet for a moment, digesting my words. Are you telling the truth? Why would I lie? I answered. If I were still in my old trade, do you think I'd keep compromising photographs in my desk? He hesitated. Probably not. Of course not. Those photos are museum pieces, a reminder of a time when I was a different person. Then why do you keep them? Insurance, I said simply, in case anyone ever gets the urge to look into my past. These pictures prove that I know where all the skeletons are buried. Whose skeletons? People who once gave me commissions, politicians, businessmen, police officers. Many of them are still alive and in high positions. Danby nodded understandingly. Mutual destruction. Exactly. They don't touch me, I don't touch them. We sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the people walking through the park. What should I do next? Danby finally asked. Live a normal life. Work, take care of my wife, plan for the future. Forget what I've learned. And if Cordelia insisted on an explanation, tell her the truth. Part of it. What truth? That you were having financial problems and you were afraid to tell her. That I helped you out with money, and now you feel bad about your debt to your father-in-law. Danby thought about it. It could work. It would. Women understand family debt and male pride. What if she asks where you got the money? You tell her you don't know. I'm an old man. I have savings. The details are none of your business. We got up from the bench. And remember, I added, this is the last conversation we'll have on this subject. No more meetings, no more calls, no more hints. Back to normal family life. Got it. All right then. Goodbye, Danby. Goodbye. As I walked home, I thought about how things had finally stabilized. Danby had an explanation that would allow him to sleep well. Cordelia will have a plausible version of what happened, and I would return to my quiet, retired life. The following Sunday, the atmosphere at dinner improved markedly. Danby seemed calmer. Cordelia stopped asking suspicious questions. We discussed the weather, the news, plans for the summer. By the way, Dad, Cordelia said over tea, Danby told me about his problems. Thank you for helping him. You're welcome, I replied. We're family. Still, it means a lot. especially to Danby. He was worried sick. I glanced at my son-in-law. He nodded, confirming what his wife had said. Male pride, he explained. He didn't want to admit his financial difficulties. I understand, Cordelia said, but there should be no secrets in a family. There won't be now, Danby promised. And indeed, there were no more secrets. At least none that could disturb the family peace. Danby had learned to live with the knowledge of my secret. He realized that the past was in the past, and that I was no threat to him or his wife. Fear was gradually replaced by respect, and respect by understanding. Cordelia no longer suspected anything amiss. The explanation about financial problems and male pride satisfied her completely. She even began to treat me more warmly, appreciating my willingness to help the family in times of need. And I went back to my normal life. The garden, books, newspapers, evening walks. The quiet existence of a man who had long ago settled accounts with the past and was not going to rake it up. Sometimes, though, sitting in an armchair in the evening, I would pull an old envelope out of a drawer and flip through the photos, not out of nostalgia, just to remind myself of who I once was and how far I've come since then. The young man in the black and white photos seemed alien to me now. A different era, different rules, a different life. But the skills acquired in that life hadn't gone anywhere. They were just sleeping, waiting for the moment when they might be needed. So far, that moment hadn't come, and I hoped it never would. But if something went wrong, if someone tried to disturb my peace or threaten my family, well, 76 years old isn't a judgment call. Some things you don't forget as you get older. For now, I remain what I have become, a quiet retiree who grows roses and reads the newspaper, a grandfather who helps the family in times of need and doesn't ask too many questions, an ordinary old man with an extraordinary past, and Danby understands that very well.